the Los Angeles City Council's Homelessness and Poverty Committee. My name is Marquise Harris Dawson. I'm serving as the chair of this committee. We're joined by the vice chair, Councilmember Monica Rodriguez, and members Mike Bonin and Curran Price. We have a 3-item agenda today, and we will begin our meeting as we do every meeting with general public comment. We have 2 people for general public comment. Well, 1 person for general public comment. 2 people for general public comment that have also submitted on a number of items on the agenda. Each of you will have 2 minutes to speak with regard to general public comments or any item on the agenda. One person's name is Leah, and I'll ask them to come to the desk. And another person's name is Homeless Puppet.
I wasn't clear.
You got it. Let's do it.
I'd like to ask a request. If I'm going to make my comment on the item number, I'd like to hear your statement first and then be able to provide public comment on your official statement. To ask me to do it at the beginning of the meeting when I haven't even heard what your statement is denies me the right to have a public comment. I'll take my public comment now. The reason it's so important is that you have a problem with causation. And I'd like to instruct the City Council to do a report of what the cause of the increase of homelessness in the last year, or last 3 years, or 5 years. Actually, since Councilman Bonin was elected city councilman would be a good place to start, because you also had Mayor Garcetti come in at the same time, and homelessness has become a serious issue in Venice and has spread outward, or it has come to Venice, and to identify what is causing it. From my vantage point, I see that it's the destruction of low-income housing. You had all of these buildings and apartments in place, and you destroyed them, especially in downtown Los Angeles. You destroyed them to put in apartment buildings that were $3,000 or $5,000 a month. And the displacement of all those people, did it cause homelessness? And to identify that root cause is extraordinarily important, so you stop causing what you're complaining about. There's a pattern in the city of Los Angeles, causing an issue and then taxing the people to stop what you're actually causing. Thank you very much.
So we appreciate the 2 fucking minutes. Yes, it's so nice. So we got to number 1, women in homelessness report. You don't give a fuck about women, yes. In fact, when the committee recesses outside, with the exception of Monica, of course, the men on the committee refer to them as bitches, yes, and it's not good. It's not good at all. We need to start getting Lassa to start getting fucking housing for people, especially rape victims. And you know we have a lot of rape victims. You know, like Jose Weezer down the hallway, so people need to have shelter once they get in contact with Jose Weezer.
Stay on topic.
Yes. Now we get to homeless navigation. You have to navigate your way from Wall Street. You have to navigate your way to St. Julian. To where? Where the fuck are people going to live? They're not going to live in the rich part of the area. Let's look at Mr. Bonin. Are you going to let them live over in Playa del Rey? No! That's why he put the road diets in, to keep the homeless from navigating into the rich, white, scumbag areas, yes. The homeless will go in CD8 and CD9, and there's not a fucking thing you can do about it, yes. Now we do the winter shelter. It's raining, it's pouring, the old man is snoring. Why, the homeless drowned in the fucking water, yes. So we need to have year-round shelters, not just in the winter, but in the summer. And finally, I recommend all outside contracts go through my favorite provider, Dale Richardson and Associates, the finest contractor in city history.
We'll see you next time. Thank you so much,
thank you,
Mr.
sir.
Puppet.
I appreciate it.
We'll begin our
Wake up,
agenda.
Mike Bonin.
You got to sit down or get out.
You need to wake up, Mike. Yes.
We'll start our agenda with item number 3.
Yes, sir. Item number 3 is a motion by Council Members Harris, Dawson, and Bonin relative to effectuating the winter shelter program.
Take it away.
Good afternoon, Meg Barclay, City Homeless Coordinator in the CAO's office. The motion before you describes the winter shelters that were procured by the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority 2 years ago. This is the last year of contract authority for this set of shelters. The winter shelter program typically opens December 1st through March 1st. And it is in response to harsh weather conditions. It's a less service-intensive model and designed to get people in and out of the weather. It only operates overnight, 14 hours a day, but 7 days a week. The motion today is just identifies the shelters that were contracted with as a result of Lassa's procurement, and the start and end dates of the winter shelter program. And I'm joined by Paul Duncan here from Lassa, who oversees the contracts for this.
Anything from you for the good of the record, Mr. Duncan?
That really covers it. We're working diligently to try to make sure that sites are in the place to where will be able to open on December 1st to start serving people.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Questions, Mr. Bonin?
Just a couple. This represent more or less or the same number of beds as last year?
There are a few less beds, so specifically Weingart and Skid Row, they historically had 25 beds. Due to growth, they have turned down a portion of those beds. We are trying to see if we can locate somewhere that can take on those additional beds. When we first procured in Spa 2, the San Fernando Valley, we actually had 2 sites. So we had the Silmar Armory, and we had the Pacoima site. The representation of 200 beds is what the Pacoima site can actually hold maximum. However, when you look at that in comparison to previous years, where we had Silmar and Pacoima operating at the same time, they didn't both operate last year, but 2 years ago they did. It is a reduction of what was originally awarded.
How many fewer beds total?
I think one site was 120 and one was 170, so that would be a loss of 90 beds.
A loss of 90 beds, so leaving a total of how many?
200.
No,
Overall. It's right under 800. It was 790, somewhere right there.
And the loss of how many you said?
There were 90 lost in the San Fernando Valley of what was originally awarded, and 15 in the Skid Row area.
So what percentage reduction in beds is that?
I don't have a percentage off the top of my head, but it's right around,
It's a little around 10, 12%.
yeah, 12%. We are looking to find other locations. This has been a challenge in the county. We have actually lost several site locations over the last year, and finding new providers and new sites has been a challenge for the winter shelter program, with it being such a short operation of lower funding amount.
And does this money here that's allocated include the provision of the buses to take people to and from the shelters?
We have some money reserved specifically for transportation in areas that do not want walk-ups allowed. So we identify based on what the regional desire is, whether that site will allow walk-ups, but we do have a reserved budget to pay additional transportation for those that do not allow
Let me ask
walk-ups.
the question specifically then. The Armory in the 11th District requires no walk-ups as a condition of our being able to use it. So as a result, we've had to have various shuttles. Over the years, Santa Monica and other jurisdictions have prohibited a stop in their jurisdiction. So for a couple of years, the only place in SPA 5 that had a bus stop was in Venice. So people had to come from Mr. Koretz's district and Mr. O'Farrell's district to Venice Beach in order to get to West LA, and then we'll drop back off in Venice Beach again. We've had to add, last year in Malibu, last year in CD5, and some other places, shuttle buses, making sure that if we get a place in Manchester Square this year, if Santa Monica agrees to do it, that we'll be able to do that so that we're not shuttling people in from other parts of the county to an already large homeless population.
Our providers were supposed to give us a list of finalized pickup locations by the end of today. So at the end of today, we should have a finalized list of pickup locations. If there is need to identify additional based on what's submitted today, we will work with our providers and jurisdictions to identify other potential pickup locations.
Excellent. So I just wanted to reiterate it before we go on to Mr. Price and Ms. Rodriguez. So less beds in the city and less beds in the county, and homelessness is going up?
With winter shelter, we have seen a loss. We no longer, on top of the 2 sites listed in the city that are no longer available, I will say the Silmar is no longer operating as a winter shelter location. However, that is being updated to now be a year-round bridge housing program specifically for women with a trauma-informed care focus. So we have not lost that site. It is really transitioning. However, that makes that site no longer available. And then in the Lancaster area, Grace Resources did close. We are actively working, and we have 2 sites that we're hoping will bring online, and that'll actually increase the number of beds available for winter shelter in the Lancaster area, and we're looking at trying to find a location in the Southeast LA area to replace the loss of Bell Shelter, which no longer has those beds available because they've added year-round beds in that spot.
All right, Ms. Price?
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the report and the update. Question on these winter shelter locations. Are these all the winter shelter locations, or are these in addition to others that exist?
There are,
The ones in the city.
these are the ones specifically in the city. So we have 4 other sites within the county and are working on adding 2 additional sites to the ones that have been approved.
And these sites listed here, are there any reductions in there?
The only one that had the reduction is the Weingart location. So the one on San Pedro Street is the one that has a reduction of 15 beds. And then in the Hope of the Valley, the Pacoima one, it is an increase of beds at that site. However, we are no longer, we do not have the Silmar site available this year. So
Can you tell me how many are at the First to Serve site on 25th Street?
the First to Serve site on 21st Street.
25th Street.
There are 150 beds available at that location.
And for the 25th and Vernon site, the Hoppick site?
The 25th in Vernon, that has 164 beds available at that site.
And these are first come, first serve, when
First come, first
the
serve.
doors open in the afternoon, I guess, for that evening?
Yes.
And how does the transportation program work? Are there 4 or 5 pickup locations for a particular site, or how do folks engage transportation if they need it?
It depends on the site. In South LA, where we do have more actual site locations, they do not have as many pickup sites because they are covering a smaller geographical portion than, say, in Spa 5, where there's one site for the whole area. The pickup locations and transportations are a part of the expectations of the subcontract agency. So some operate the transportation themselves and some subcontract it out to a provider to offer that transportation.
But it's at a fixed location. People know to go to this location, be there by 3 o'clock to get picked up, to be...
We have asked for finalized locations today so that we can start to alert the community of where those pickup locations will be so that people are aware.
Mr. Chairman, I'd appreciate it if maybe they can report back on where those exact locations are, just so that we can track with you,
We'll get those locations to your offices.
making sure. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Ms. Rodriguez, to close.
Yes, no, thank you. And thank you for reporting back also on the use of the transition of the armory, and that it's going to be now repurposed for full-time year-round use, which we know, there was a lot of work around that particular location, working closely with our county supervisor and the community to help really make sure that that facility is going to be a beneficial use. But, Mr. Chair, I'd like to request at this time to remove Hope of the Valley from the list of the winter shelter locations and continue pending resolution of some concerns that we still have about this location and its operation. And we're going to be dialoguing with the community and developing a good neighbor policy at this site. So I'd like to hold that.
Excellent. Thank you. So we will move this item with the two amendments. Hearing no objection, that'll be the order. Thank you both for your presentation. We'll move on to item number 1.
Yes, sir.
And just members, on the next two items, these are reports. We will not necessarily take an action, but in the interest of time, I'd ask if you have questions, just interject during the reports so we can get through the conversations in as expeditious a manner as we can avail ourselves of. Yes.
Item number 1 is a presentation by the Los Angeles Homeless Service Authority relative to Lassa's Ad Hoc Committee on Women and Homelessness Report and Recommendations.
Good afternoon. Jessica Reed, Policy Manager with Lassa. And I'm joined by Aaron Cox, our Policy Supervisor, also with Lassa. So thank you for hearing our report today. We want to apprise you of a really fantastic report, in my opinion, put together by the Ad Hoc Committee on Women and Homelessness. And I'll try to breeze through this because I understand some folks need to leave today. So first of all, the Ad Hoc Committee formed at the end of 2016 in response to sort of an alarming growth increase in the amount of women experiencing homelessness. Thank you. In addition to two of our commission members who sat on the committee, then chair, now vice chair, Wendy Krull and Sarah Dussault, there were also 3 city-focused or city representatives in some capacity on the committee. We had Elizabeth Eastland, who is the vice chair of the city's domestic violence task force, Elisa Orduna from the mayor's office, and Jessica Postigo, who is president of the Commission on the Status of Women. The purpose of the committee really was to understand, consider, and address the needs of women within the homeless crisis response system. And it did this by 2 ways, providing a forum for discussion and developing and promoting recommendations that culminated in this report. The emergent themes that came out of the committee's 8 months of meeting really focus on, one, obviously the lack of housing resources that exist in the city and in the county. Also, the involvement or need for involvement of individuals with lived experience. There was tremendous public comment throughout the life cycle of the committee that was invaluable to the recommendations that ended up being made. And some of those folks are here today in the audience, and they were absolutely incredible. Also, another theme was some improvements that need to be made to data collection and tracking, ways to enhance training and our technical assistance, and also to make sure that service delivery is provided through with gender and trauma-informed lens. There are some accomplishments as the committee met. Some accomplishments were achieved over the 8 months. Several that are related to Measure H. For example, rigorously funding rapid rehousing programs. We also created a COC-wide policy on gender non-discrimination, and we also provided trainings for that. Which is very important, especially to our transgender and non-gender conforming constituents who are experiencing homelessness. We also were able to provide some flexibility in our rapid rehousing programs with respect to providing and funding childcare, which is critical when you have especially single parents looking for work to sustain their housing. And also our Lassa-funded shelters now require contractually that to provide feminine hygiene products. So that was very important. So the next set of slides are some recommendations, and I just want to sort of preemptively say this is not necessarily for council action, but more as, some of these might require council action, but more of a way to look at things that are in development or in implementation right now with respect to Triple H and with the comprehensive set of homeless strategies, to having those strategy leads and having people working on Triple H take into consideration these recommendations where applicable. They're thematically, the recommendations around data and reporting. For example, there was a recommendation to conduct a housing gaps analysis for women experiencing homelessness. There is a county strategy, a city strategy, 9K, that focuses on that. And today, your council action to roll over that funding from the last fiscal year to the current fiscal year will ensure that that strategy is met. We're also working with HSID. We've been discussing with HSID and working with Abigail Marquez and her team to find ways to align our domestic violence performance measures. So those are some conversations that we'll continue to have with them. Also, in terms of Triple H, again, conducting some sort of analysis of what women need to feel safe, build community, and succeed in permanent housing. I think that was something that came out, especially by public comment, that understanding better understanding the needs of women in permanent housing. With respect to training and capacity building, one thing, again, making sure that our training that there's regular ongoing training around trauma-informed care and awareness about all kinds of issues that affect women. Also, including people with lived experience as in those trainings as well. They are experts on the experience of homelessness, and so that would be a really added benefit to those trainings. And then finally, supporting cross-system training. In terms of funding, there are some recommendations around funding prevention services, increasing per diem rates for interim housing. Lassa has been able to do that, and I know that the city's domestic violence shelter operations and human trafficking shelter operations is seeking to do that as well. In terms of service delivery, ensuring that, addressing intergenerational cycles by assessing and treating trauma experienced by children, that is probably a key prevention effort. If you really want to prevent homelessness for the next generation, is addressing the trauma that children in families are facing when they're experiencing homelessness. And then finally around advocacy and policy development, things like supporting policies that strengthen the city's rent stabilization ordinance, opposing policies that criminalize homelessness, such as quality of life tickets, and finally, just including women with lived experience in all parts of planning and service delivery, which is probably a theme that resounds.
Excellent. Excellent summary. Thank you also.
Sure. Sorry, I was a little speedy there.
No, speed is not something we criticize. Questions or comments, members? Excellent. Thank you all so much for this report. We'll receive and file this matter and move on to number 2.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 2 is a CEO report relative to the Comprehensive Homeless Strategy Implementation, Strategies 6E, Evaluate Homeless Navigation Centers, and 7O, Expanding Emergency Shelter and Improving Access.
Good afternoon again. Meg Barclay, City Homeless Coordinator in the CAO's office. These 2 reports were heard by the Homeless Strategy Committee on October 26th last week, and they were forwarded over for your review. But they are reports from Lassa, so Paul Duncan is here to present.
Hello, Paul Duncan, Associate Director of Performance Management at Lassa. So we'll start with Strategy 6E, which is around the homeless navigation centers. So for a quick overview and historical context, we have had several sites that we've looked at over the past year, one specifically in Council District 11 and another one in Council District 15, which would have opened a navigation center that had storage along with support for other linkage services to permanent housing resources. Due to issues specifically around community concern with those sites and what that would mean having a navigation center in those areas, both of those sites did face some opposition within the community, and we continue to explore other options that would be acceptable within those communities to meet the community concern. So those, unfortunately, we have not been able to fully push forward at this time, but continue to look and explore in those areas. Through Measure H, the one area that we have not seen a lot of pushback is just having access centers where people can go in, get a shower, basic services, mail, do some laundry, and get connected to services. Through a recent RFP with Measure H, we were able to award 5 additional access center sites that will be coming online within the next 2 months. So 2 of those sites will be, there were 3 sites that Lassa was already funding. With Measure H, they asked that the remaining funding be spread to service planning areas that did not have funding. So 2 of those sites are within the city of Los Angeles. So there will be 2 additional access center sites funded through Measure H coming online.
Do we know where?
One was in SPA 8 and one is in SPA 5.
SPA 8 is the harbor, and SPA 5 is West Los Angeles.
Thank you, Meg. So 2, 4, and 6 already did have providers.
The same problems as the 11
Oh.
and 15?
Huh?
'Cause that's basically what you just said. It's just 11 and 15
5.
again, right?
Correct.
5.
Okay. All
5,
right.
yeah, it would be serving 11 and 15 with a place that people could go in and access resources.
Can I ask, how would it be different from the access center that St. Joseph Center offers currently, which has counseling, showers, mail?
It will be very similar to the services that are being provided already at that site. These sites do not have any storage or such things.
Presumably it would be a different part of SPA 5 than one where one already exists.
Correct. Additionally, we did look at Sylmar originally as potentially being something similar to what was written in the initial 6E strategy, with a navigation center that would also have shelter as a part of that navigation center. As it's kind of morphed and gone to women's beds, it's not looking fully like that, but we are looking to have storage as part of that site and looking at other opportunities to have enhanced shelter locations where there is something similar to the bin location where people can take a significant amount of belongings, and that's not a barrier to getting into shelter. We are looking at expanded hours of of coming in as well. The one area that we are moving forward, we do have a site located in District 8 that we are moving forward, and we'll be working on, as that site gets finalized, shortly before that, to identify a provider to provide services in that location.
Mr. Chairman.
Bryce?
So do we have any navigation sites up and running then? I'm still not clear. Are there any in existence?
We have access centers, so really a place people can drop in, get a shower.
Okay.
But the really more enhanced
Right.
sites that have
Like the
a
model
wide
that we're
range.
looking at. We don't
Yeah,
have that.
the models that were originally referenced in the initial strategy, we do not have anything that really mirrors that at this point.
And can you tell us where these 14-hour programs were that were converted to 24-hour programs?
I'll review that in strategy 7.0 that goes a little more with the expanding the shelter strategy, so I can speak to, do you
There
want
are
to?
two reports on this
Yeah.
item. There's one on the shelter expansion and then this one on navigation centers.
Okay.
So if that's still a question,
The comment here was just converted 14-hour programs to 24-hour programs. I just wondered,
Yeah.
where were they and which programs actually got converted?
we converted all but one location within the city.
Okay.
The only location that we fund that has not converted is Proyecto Pastoral, and it's located within a church, and due to the siting of it, they were not able to convert to 24-hour operation.
And just to clarify, those were shelters that used to be overnight shelters that are now operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah, we no longer, except for that site, have anything
But
that
our goal is to have, 2 or 3 navigation centers around, 5 or 10 or 20 or 30, or what's the goal?
None of those have what we'd consider a navigation center where people can, and the community
What's
can
our
drop.
goal, though? What's our goal to establish
Our goal,
how many of these navigation centers?
we don't have a stated goal. The more that we can
More the better.
prop up, especially if we can start to locate some of those with shelter beds also, to where it's an enhanced shelter site and people can come in, they can do storage. People in the community that are experiencing homelessness can even stop there and that are not staying in the shelter, can use a restroom. If we can have more centers like that, the better. So we are looking at some potential opportunities
So
in the future.
In our office, with our asset management division and our municipal facilities group, have been working with council offices on a number of city-owned sites that could be made available as storage or navigation centers. And I know there are a couple that are getting very close to introducing motions to start that feasibility review and more intensive review pretty soon. So our goal really for city-owned sites for facilities has really been those types of navigation centers, things like that as well. So we're looking for sites for those.
Even 1 or 2 in the 9th, I understand, so.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can I just ask, what's the difference between an access center and a navigation center? What makes the distinction?
That is, definitionally, these are kind of terms that have really come up over the last year and don't have clear definitions. What we've looked at, an access center is really your basic drop-in center that works during regular business hours. It's really contained, where a navigation center has some more enriched services. It has storage. It has the ability to bring in multiple providers into one space, where an access center is typically run by one agency, has some showers, has ability to provide some basic case management and linkage to resource. So that's how we've thought of the difference of the two. However, there is no agreed lexicon of definition of what is a housing navigation center and what's an access center.
As they're anticipated in the strategy, it is as Paul described. So with low barrier shelter, storage, safe parking, in addition to case management and showers, laundry, things like that that are designed to kind of be a one-stop sort of available services and also access to more intensive case management services, getting people into the CES and with access to housing navigation, case management.
So I guess the only thing that prevents the St. Joseph Center from being called the Navigation Center is the absence of storage, because they've got everything else that you just mentioned.
And that I think that they probably existed prior to the discussion
No,
of this
but
as
I'm,
right.
but I'm,
I think
I'm
that
thinking
you
of
could,
the model, not...
yeah, and I think it's a mix of services, not necessarily, so I think you could consider St. Joseph Center a navigation center.
Part of my problem here is I think we're sort of in this murky zone on both this and the next item, where we've set ourselves up so that we can't succeed and so that we can't fail, because we don't have clear definitions of what we're trying to do, and we don't have a stated goal of how many beds we want to have, how many shelters we want to have, and if we don't have a goal, we can't measure or not we've been successful. You know, I set out in my district to put 3 properties for PSH and 1 for storage. So far, I've failed on the storage. So far, we're making progress on the PSH. Neighborhood Council just endorsed one of them, 11 to 1. It's probably going to be one of the first ones to file. The other 2 are moving forward. So I can measure, at least from my stated goals, not doing great here, doing better here. If we don't have stated goals for how many more shelter beds we have this year, and we have fewer than last year, then I don't know how we make any progress. How can we get to a point for both this and the second report where we actually have stated goals, and annually we can look at, did we meet this or did we not meet this?
So I would have 2 responses to that. I think, as you recall, a couple of meetings ago, we got authority to apply to the county for some funding to kind of review and take a look at our strategy, because I agree with you, Councilman, especially when we have so many strategies all trying to move forward at once. It's hard to focus. It's hard to know what direction should we be moving in each of those, and focus and set goals, because they're very diverse set of strategies. So that's really the goal, I think, of that process of reviewing the CHS and looking at how it's structured, how we could structure it to create a better sense of what those goals should be. But I think the other thing, and you'll see in the next quarterly performance report, is we're going to have the first set of metrics on the set of active strategies, or on a subset of active strategies that actually can report. Some of them are report backs, or require other actions before they can really be implemented. And so I think that will give us a good benchmark for being able to say where we need to be in relation to where we are. So I think that I agree with you. It's difficult to measure where we're going if we haven't said where we want to be on some of these strategies. And I think that those 2 efforts are going to help us be able to do that.
It's essential.
Yes.
It's essential. Just one other question on 6E is, it says the report cites the City of San Francisco's Navigation Center as an exemplary model. Their model is a low barrier shelter with other services on site. Shelters is the next item. Are we suggesting that navigation centers should also have shelter beds?
That is one model that we have looked at. We actually send up staff to go and look at the San Francisco navigation centers. We've spoken to officials within San Francisco. They have experienced several similar issues where it did lead to a lot of community pushback in certain areas. We are, and as Meg said, we are looking at several sites where we would like to do something similar to the low barrier, having the shelter beds available along with some other services. So we are exploring opportunities for combining the 2.
It's a very site-specific evaluation, I think, as far as, the size of the site, the population near the site, what's appropriate for that site. For instance, the navigation center that is in Mr. Harris-Dawson's district has pretty much everything but shelter in it right now. So, or at least as it's kind of being anticipated. And that's...
And put a bookmark in that.
Yeah, put a bookmark in that. Things change all the time. But yes, so we're looking at storage and laundry and case management and also job training, I believe, at that site. So I think it's really also very kind of site-specific question as well, the size of the site and the population too.
I have more on 7.0.
And that San Francisco was identified also in the strategy itself on 6E, and so I think that's why that was used as a...
So as we put I think the conversation about goals is right, and I would associate myself with all the remarks in that regard, but as we set the mark for the ideal navigation centers, have we laid out to the council offices and to the staff that we're going for all these things? All of these different elements. So, for instance, in our discussions about the navigation system, shelter beds never came up. I mean, it works out that there probably is a good opportunity to do shelter beds, but we didn't start off there because we kind of didn't have, at least not that I knew about, we didn't sort of have this checklist of, this is the Cadillac version, this is the Ford version, this is the Hyundai version. So, I mean, have we put that out? Have we put the marker out so that everybody knows, like, this is yeah.
I think that where the conversation of a navigation center comes up, it really is sort of what's the mix of services that the council office is looking for. What could the site accommodate? So yeah, it's kind of a customized conversation.
Got it.
Really.
But we could put something together of here's
the
all the
model.
different options that a council district could look at.
Got it. Thank you. That would be helpful. Other questions, comments? Good. Anything else?
Moving on to
You got it.
7.0. So over this past year, Lassa has been, these are just Lassa funded, so I will speak a little bit about what the health agencies have done as well. So Lassa added an additional 400 beds within the city over this past year. So we'd put out a procurement at the beginning of the last fiscal year, and that added in a little over 400 additional year-round shelter beds. Along with those additional beds, that was the point that we converted all but that one site to 24-hour operations. So we no longer had 14-hour operating shelters. So we saw this as a win of really allowing people to feel a little more stable and work on goals within the shelter system. This year we have added about 300 additional beds were recently awarded through an RFP. Those aren't online yet. This was just awarded this past month, so about a week ago. Commission approved 300 new beds. The majority of those are within the city or within literally a mile of city boundary, so will be heavily used by people experiencing homelessness within the city of Los Angeles. We this week released had the bidders conference for an RFP for an additional 115 women's trauma-informed beds. So there was the 85 in Silmar that will be coming online. There's an RFP out for an additional 115 beds in the county. We anticipate that some of those will most likely be awarded within the city, depending on what we get back in proposals. Additionally, we had awarded last year and set up our beds to where they were really a little more flexible, and It was our attempt to really push our shelter system forward to be more focused on exits to permanent housing. In doing so, we thought creating flexibility in which beds would be available for people that walked up, wanted a bed, first come, first serve, and which beds would be reserved for people that had already been matched to permanent housing. This created confusion and challenges for many of our providers. Some liked it, some didn't. We made a change this year and specifically designating which beds would be bridge beds, so set aside for people with high acuities, people that have been matched to a permanent housing resource and are in the process of navigating into permanent housing, while specifically designating those beds that will be available to people that are looking for a bed. As we do this, we're conscious and really looking at how can we push our shelter system forward, not to be just a shelter system that shelters people, but really an opportunity that assists people in the process of getting into permanent housing. Our goal of every program is the endpoint is permanent housing, not just to get somebody off that street. That is valuable, and we recognize that when people want to get off the street, that having a place is a valuable thing, yet we don't want people to just be stuck in shelters. We want those services to be there to assist people towards that permanent housing. So as we made our change last year, we did see some improvements over the past where we had 14-hour shelters. It was first come, first serve. People lined up. You weren't necessarily always guaranteed a bed the next night. And it just was not a very effective program. Similar to winter shelter plays a vital role of protecting people from the elements. But when you look at the overall outcomes of our winter shelter program, it's just very hard when people are there for 14 hours. It's first come, first serve. It's not the most intentional program towards permanent housing. It plays a humanitarian role. So historically, we saw very low outcomes of people exiting from our shelter beds into permanent housing. As we made the shift last year, and at the end of the fiscal year, for all of our shelter beds for single adults and youth, we saw an exit rate of 23% to permanent housing. We continue to push for higher. We have much higher targets than that. We're bringing in technical assistance to improve the services, make sure that staff are focused on that permanent housing, and not who can be the best shelter resident, but who can be the best at navigating and supporting and getting into permanent housing. So 23% is kind of our marker that we start from last year, which is a great improvement of historically what our exits to permanent housing have been from our shelter. So not only are we adding additional beds, but we really look to increase the effectiveness. On the family side, we didn't add many actual solid physical units this year. We had a procurement earlier this year to rebid the family system. Unfortunately, we didn't get proposals of new sites for families. However, we did have additional funding. We have added additional funding in for motel vouchers. We've really focused on any family that is experiencing literal homelessness, that we have a place for them to go to be off the street so that we don't have kids sleeping on the street. We are seeing an increased inflow that greatly exceeds what we've seen in the past. The demand, we are concerned at this point that the demand is outpacing our current resource, so we are looking at Measure H funding and making shifts, but we are concerned at this point of having enough shelter, crisis housing, bridge housing for families to make it through the end of this year. So we are going through motel voucher money much quicker than expected.
Excellent. Thank you. Questions, comments? Mr. Bonin?
Thanks for the presentation. The verbal report here was better than the written in terms of satisfying some of my concerns. Listen, I remain impatient and dissatisfied with where we are with the shelter system. We need a dramatic overhaul from where we were, and we ain't there yet, for sure. But you articulated exactly what we need to be doing, is that we don't want shelters to be the solution. We want them to be a pathway to permanent supportive housing. The problem we've had is the last couple decades is we really haven't had much of a shelter system to speak of. So we've had sidewalks being the interim solution. And sidewalks are not the place where people should be waiting for permanent supportive housing. What I'm still unclear on is, you said we increased by 400 beds as an RFP out for 300. Where did we, when we approved the comprehensive homelessness strategy, how many beds, shelter beds, did we have? And how many do we have now, counting that 400?
I would have to go back and look at,
So last year, we added 425 beds. And this year, they're saying they're adding a majority of the additional 300 beds that are coming online through Measure H are in the city.
So how many do we have total then?
It should be around 2,300. We can confirm, but that should be the number.
Yeah, what I'd like to see in these reports, just at least for me, is where did we start? Where have we gone? And the success rate of the model that you talked about, but also there's another metric to look at in terms of success rate is what percentage of the need are we addressing with this number of beds? So if we've got 30,000 people asleep on the streets at night and we have 3,000 beds, then we're still a long way away. So I'd like to sort of see those numbers in there. I think that would be really helpful. The other thing is, in addition to the percentages, some hard numbers. When you say, was it 23% of the folks who have been in one of the 24-hour shelter models have gone on to permanent supportive housing, how many people is that?
yes, we can get you that. That will be a part of the report and metrics of how many people that is. I will forward that on to Meg, who can forward it on to.
Yes.
That would be good to have in the reports for any of these strategies, because we're talking about flesh and
Right.
blood, real people.
I know that part of what was used to generate the numbers for Proposition HHH and Measure H was the housing needs assessment that Lassa did in late 2015, early 2016, I believe. And I know they're planning to update that. So we should also be using that as, again, I think that we have a sense of what the need is what I'm saying, and we'll have
Right.
an updated version of that to come.
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
And in addition to, one of the things I just asked for is, what percentage of the need of the unsheltered do we have beds for? And it's still a relatively small percentage.
Yep.
Is that then helps us set the goals I was asking about under the last report? And, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can divide by 15 and say, hey, how many of these beds are you going to be able to fill this year? And then we have a metric of success or failure individually. Or you look at geographic balance or whatever, but we have to have some stated goals and some real metrics to start holding us accountable.
Currently, countywide, 75% of our homeless population is unsheltered, so it's a large gap. 75%,
Yeah, it's about
approximately.
25,000.
Which is one of the highest rates in the country.
Correct.
Yeah.
It is. It's right at the top of unsheltered percentage.
I've said this a million times before, but when New York got sued, they agreed to a right to shelter. We got sued, and we effectively agreed to a right to sidewalks, which is a disaster. I mean, your report mentions, it's either this or the last one that mentions, one of the difficulties in getting to the shelter model we have. And the report did a good job explaining all the barriers. not a good job at explaining the goals, is one of the barriers was cost. And I get how from Lassa's point of view, yes, that's going to be more expensive per bed and it's going to be unpredictable. But we and the taxpayers have to look at it from how much are we paying in cleanups? How much are we paying in cost to the neighborhoods of having the shelter system actually being on the sidewalks? And it's a failure. So that's part of the metric we need to look at. I don't think we can just come and say, well, it'll be more expensive to do this. That's a problem. I think it needs to be, this will require an extra cost. Council, help us.
Compared to what?
Get it, yeah.
More expensive compared to what?
Exactly. Because I'll shut up in just a second, but one of the things that frustrated me about this report was we have a long way to go for a really big shift in how we do business. And this is the part of the comprehensive homelessness strategy that is going to have the most significant impact on our neighborhoods,
Taxpayers.
on the encampments, on the taxpayers who invested heavily in H and in Triple H and who are very impatient already that there's been no deliverables. And what frustrated me was we're thinking about, we're exploring, we're looking into, and we need, I think the looking into was the strategy development, and now we need to move to the action part. And just one question on that little rant of mine is, I'll use this as an example. Lassa and its providers also recognize the importance of animal companionship to many people who are experiencing homelessness and are working with our partners to inform our shelter residents with pets of the resources that are available to them. That's very passive. It's, okay, here's something you might know. Are we doing anything to build into our RFPs a requirement that they have to do these things to lower barriers? And if that's a question of more money, what are we doing then to shift in our budget accommodations, allocations, the amount that we pay per bed so that we can do that? I think that's kind of the questions we need to get to.
It's not so much, the challenge has not been so much the extra cost. There is a slight extra cost. We last year put out a request for information. We had some money through the county to provide enhancements to shelters that wanted to allow for pets. So it offset some of those costs. Where we've seen the most challenges is agencies that, due to their internal counsel, having concerns about potential liability from pets that come along with that. Some shelters have been hesitant and pushed back on allowing for pets due to potentially being sued.
So,
We do encourage and we do award points, and it is something that we desire. I mean, we clearly state that is our preference, that allow residents to have pets. Most people are going in that direction. We are working actively with our providers that have said we don't want to allow for pets. Obviously, you got to allow for service animals around the hesitance of legal issues.
So, I just have a request as a chair of this committee, and I think mainly this is for you, Ms. Barclay, but for everybody who comes to this committee. In general, I respond really well to metrics and not well to anecdotes because they don't tell me anything, right? So saying that we ask people, are we encouraged, or those are great as bullet points for what processes happen, but it doesn't give us any idea. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Is it staying the same? Or how it's or what our progress is in relation to the problem of homelessness in general, right? So homelessness we know is growing because we get hard numbers on that, but it's hard to get a handle from both from the oral reports and from the written reports. like how we're doing relative to that, right? So on all of it, whether it's pets or winter shelter or shelter beds or navigations or all of that. So we would, I'd respond well to that. I'll give a little bit of a trade secret that'll probably come back to haunt me, but, I ran a nonprofit organization for years, and one of the things we always did if we didn't hit our numbers is we wrote things like, we had really great interactions with single moms, and they responded really positively to our programming. No number in there anywhere because we didn't want to say the number, and I don't want the public to have that reaction. So to the extent that we can tighten up and approach our reporting in that way, it'd be very, very helpful to me, and I'd appreciate it a great deal.
Yeah, the Homeless Strategy Committee asked for the same thing, so we'll make sure that we are keeping an eye on having, wherever possible, where we're able to state specific numbers associated with accomplishments, that we're able to put those in there. And we're excited to be able to do that starting this quarter in the quarterly performance reports as well. So you'll start seeing a lot of numbers very
Thank
soon.
you. I really appreciate it.
And goals.
Yeah,
And
goals is the next,
impact on the scope of the
yes,
problem.
yeah, got it.
Ms. Price? Excellent.
Anything further?
Anything else on this report?
I forgot. I said at the beginning that I would also speak a little bit about what the health agencies are doing.
Yes.
For a quick overview, they are adding both DMH and DHS through Measure H, are looking to add on 250 beds each this year. So specifically for people coming out of hospitals with high vulnerability, mental health hospitalizations, and then hopefully next year with approval from the Board of Supervisors, each will add another 250 beds. And then the Department of Public Health with the Medi-Cal expansion and some funding through Measure H has been able to create 500 beds specifically for people that are coming out of substance abuse treatment that would normally have been returning to either hopefully getting a bed or be returning to the street. They will have specific beds, 500 specific beds set aside for people that have gone through substance abuse treatment. So they are both adding additional capacity in beds as well through Measure H.
So we're growing.
We're growing. We're adding additional beds.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Anything further on this? Excellent. Well, we will accept this report. Where does that put us in terms of our business today?
The desk is clear, sir.
Excellent. Thank you. We are adjourned. Thank you all so much.